Okay, we are at the minute, so we'll go ahead and just jump into things. So, hey everybody, good to meet you. Jen and I will introduce ourselves formally here in just a few minutes. Um, you're probably wondering if there's just a magical AI button that you can click that will grade your papers and provide the perfect student feedback. And at some point in this conversation, we're going to show you how we're getting really close to that and how the technology, the general available technology around AI, is helping Jen and I in the classroom. What we're hoping for today is that this is truly a conversation. We love to see your chats, your comments. We'll do our best to engage with it. And admittedly, Jen and I do not have a script. We have some key bullet points, and we have prepared some demonstrations. And just as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded so that we can send it out to people that signed up but aren't able to make it. But again, this is a conversation. Please jump in, ask questions, give emojis, thumbs up, anything that you can. We love to see the engagement. And the core of our conversation is really about feedback in the classroom, and specifically how AI feedback is utilized to improve our communications. So, Jen, are you excited to talk about feedback in the classroom?
I am. And as Daniel mentioned, this really is a conversation. We want it to be rather free-flowing. And so we are going to dangerously open it up for chat comments, and we are looking for your input because we want you to be involved in this. When Daniel and I first met and were discussing this webinar and our plans for it, we both realized that the two of us have vastly different views on what feedback is in the classroom. And we thought if the two of us are so different in our perspectives of what it is, we wanted to hear what everyone else thought too. So in the chat, we would love it if you would make a comment about what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of feedback in the classroom. And so we're going to give you an opportunity to add that, and we're going to be bringing that into our conversation as well. But when Daniel and I first started talking about AI in the classroom and the feedback in general, I think our differences depended on where we were coming from. And so I'm an assistant dean at Los Angeles Pacific University, and I'm responsible for the health sciences and information systems. But previously, I spent over 20 years in the classroom with undergrad and graduate students, teaching a mix of classes like research methods, statistics, anatomy and physiology, and writing courses. And so when I think of feedback, it's very course dependent and assignment dependent. Like I'm going to need more from you. Like what class are we talking about? Are we talking about a writing assignment? And is that writing assignment a draft, or are we at the final version of it? And so I just immediately jump into a very specific assignment and the type of constructive criticism that I can give to students to help them improve in their next iteration. And then Daniel, what did you say?
Yeah, so before I say that, I love seeing some of the chatter here. Some people said timely feedback. It must be accurate, helping students improve. I know for me, when Jen and I first sat down to talk about this topic, for me, it was thinking about the text messages I needed to send to a student in week one, or the announcements, the weekly announcements that we do in our online asynchronous classes. And a lot of that comes because of my insecurity and my background. So I am, my full-time job is actually the IT director at Los Angeles Pacific University. I've been an adjunct professor at LAPU for, I've taught about 4 classes, and I typically have smaller class sizes because I'm teaching out one of the programs there. And so for me, this idea of AI-powered feedback, it helps me overcome a lot of the insecurities that new professors, I'm assuming other new professors, and this probably, hopefully isn't just me, but just that the overwhelming, insecurity that you have, that you really are trying to partner with the student on some shared objective, right? To pass the class, to get a certain grade. But it's all the in-between, like, how do I properly address this group? Or how do I send a word of encouragement on a weekly announcement? Because I just saw the X number of students that I had all struggled with last week, right? And so it's this more general purpose, but I love that when you and I sat down, I had this more macro kind of broad vision of how I was using AI in the classroom. And yours was really focused on like assignment level feedback.
Right.
Um, and it is very important that, as we talk about AI and the ethical use of AI, it's important to understand who you are and how you're using it and what your intended goal is. So something important to know just for this conversation is that both Jen and I work at Los Angeles Pacific University. Um, our core values at LAPU are learning, exemplary, and caring. And you'll see that, like as we go to use these tools in our demonstrations, you'll see kind of that flavor kind of baked into the whole into how we're using these tools. And you'll also see that Jen's approach is different than my approach. There's really no one way to use these tools, and it will be heavily influenced by who you are and the context of what you're trying to do. So
Right. Right. And so, like you mentioned, we're at LAPU. We are a fully online institution, and the type of feedback that we give is really all going to be transmitted via the computer. And so that means that our texts, our emails, our video feedback perhaps needs to be something that the students are going to be able to receive. I don't have the opportunity for a student to come and meet with me and for me to kind of talk it through so that they can hear my tone, and they can have me walk through projects at a pace that will be helpful to them in a one-on-one setting. So instead, I have to be very careful with the feedback and kind of read it again and make sure that it is actually accomplishing what I want it to do. Which I think if we will take a look at what others have written in the chat so far, what we want it to do is help those students improve. And so, like April mentioned, it needs to be timely. If you've ever had an assignment that part one leads to part two to part three, if you're not getting feedback from the instructors in a timely way, then you're not going to know where you need it to redirect and then make some changes for the future assignments. I liked helping everyone learn and actually apply what they've learned. I think sometimes students learn the content and then it's at that level, but we want to kind of take them to that next place where they can actually then use it and it can transfer into other courses as well.
Yeah, and I love what Olga said, that their idea of feedback in the classroom must be specific, positive, and supportive. And Olga, I feel I think we're very like-minded in that for me, it's about making sure that the words that I'm being selective about using are enriching the student's experience, because especially in an online asynchronous format, there's only so many intersections or touch points that you have with the student. And so you want to maximize those and you want them to be positive interactions. And so for me, using AI helps me kind of filter myself out sometimes, or helps me get more of an objective look at things. One thing to note about large language models and AI is that they are very literal and they are very confident. And so you'll notice through the demonstrations, or maybe just through your practical use of these tools, that oftentimes it can give an answer where you go, wait a second, that's not right. And so something important to know when we're talking about this conversation is we're never talking about the replacement of either of ourselves or what we're trying to do in the student's journey. We're trying to supplement it and add value to what we're already doing. And so although there's some time-saving opportunities here, a lot of this is about enriching what we're already doing and building upon some good habits that are already in place. So I'm really excited to talk about this.
Right. So some other things to keep in mind, Yvonne mentioned the essay revision feedback, email feedback, forum feedback, and I think all three of those speak to feedback being more than scores on a rubric. So there's some direction, not just clarification on where points were deducted, but how the students can improve their next time around. And so that's one of those things where when you have the opportunity to meet with your students, whether that's face-to-face in the office, at a coffee shop, in a Zoom meeting, or even by phone, you want to be able to provide very personalized feedback that will help that particular student improve. And so simply just referencing the rubric frequently isn't enough because they had access to the rubric at the beginning. And if it were enough, then everyone would have been at that high end. And then even another area related to that is oftentimes I'll see a student do really well on a rubric, like, well, they are acing everything, but if I want them to get better, I'm not going to settle. And so it's kind of like, you've proven you can do this. So let's take you one step further and keep stretching you and helping you to reach your full potential.
Yeah. And it's actually at LAPU, we've really adopted the power of AI, and we actually empower all of our students to use an AI assistant, and we call it Spark. And so I've actually found one of the most meaningful ways of providing feedback to students is actually encouraging them to engage with Spark. That has helped me overcome a lot of obstacles, and it aligns with my IT mantra, which is teach them how to fish, right? If you're on my team in my IT department, you've heard that countless times. What we're trying to do is help people overcome problems in a long-term setting and not just give them quick fixes. And similarly, when we're providing feedback, it's about providing kind of sticky feedback, stuff that will stick with them. And so these tools really help us do that. And I can't help but just say, it brings me back to the calculator problem. Like if you were in elementary school and you were told, hey, you can't use, or in junior high or whatever grade, and you can't use the calculator because you're not going to have that when you're older. And here we are, right? We all have calculators in our pockets. But the other thing is, it's not just here to stay. It's about knowing how to use it ethically. And you would never just enter, bad numbers into a calculator and expect it to do something magical for you. There's this common principle in IT. It's called the garbage in, garbage out. We call it GIGO, right? And AI is not exempt from that. You really want to be careful about how we're using the tool, because the better that you learn how to use it, the better outcome that you'll get from it.
Absolutely. So Elise mentioned that she likes to ensure that her feedback is authentic and personal to her own level of expertise. And I think that's a good segue to some of our examples that Daniel and I have to share with you. And so I have up on the screen an example where I used a rubric from a course assignment, and it's a short essay that the students write analyzing a case with a patient that has reported some level of injury. And in the light blue circles, you can see what my scores were on the rubric. And then you can see what Gemini is what I happen to use this time, and what the scores were from Gemini, as well as the feedback or the written comments that were coming from Gemini. And those top three components of the rubric, which are really the most weighty portion of the rubric, are where both Gemini and I were in complete agreement, at least as it relates to the scores. We were in agreement. And so we had that matching up identically. Now, full transparency, it doesn't always play out that way. But this one, I thought, wow, we're getting closer here. So maybe it's a matter of me adjusting my prompts that I'm using. Also, I tried a few different types of AI tools over the past couple of months to see which one was going to provide me a level of feedback that I was actually looking for.
Yeah.
You can see, though, that we differed a bit. The AI tool and I differed a bit for the sources and evidence, where it gave 2 out of 5 and I knocked it down to 0 completely. And as Gemini referenced, there weren't any sources cited in the essay. And one of the requirements was you do need to cite several sources in it. So with it being a stated requirement, I thought, well, where is all this content coming from? And there's no sources to support it. And then lastly, the control of the syntax, mechanics, and APA format. Again, we were slightly off, but I gave an overall score of 38, where Gemini gave 42. And I think that's fairly comparable. And while these numbers that are being spit back, it's kind of like what Daniel referenced earlier with that magic button, where you can just drop in all of your assignments and then an AI tool can grade it for you. I suppose I could do that, but
Hmm.
I did this more to check myself.
Yeah.
And so I had already done the scoring, and then I entered the same rubric and the essay into Gemini and asked it to evaluate it using the rubric and got these results. And what's helpful for me, getting back to Elise's authentic and personal, and then as well as William's comment about it being relevant and encouraging, is I tend to get into a zone and give very task oriented, like here's what you need to do type of feedback. And I thought, well, I can't do that to the students because that's not going to be all that encouraging. If I'm just saying, you didn't do this, you didn't do this, you didn't do this, I want to make sure that they know, like, you're doing this part really well, and here's how you can do it even better. And
Yeah.
so, ironically, I'm using an AI tool to help me be more human, more encouraging, where others might use it for the more nitty gritty objective feedback.
Hmm. And I love that, like, it also has comments here, right? It's not just providing a score. Do
Right.
you look at those comments? How do you look at those?
Well, for me, the critical thinking component of any type of assignment is always elusive. Like, really, what are we going for here for critical thinking? Does it mean that they are pulling in multiple sources and able to integrate them together and make sense of them, identify bias and application, or what? And if this is an entry level course, that might look very different than a 400 level or a graduate level course in terms of our expectations for critical thinking. And so when I'm getting some of the comments given back to me from the AI tool, I can look at it and think, okay, that is actually a pretty good indication that there is some level of critical thinking and puzzle building happening in the student's mind. And then it also highlights where they could do a little bit better or go for more depth.
Yeah. And I love Gabriella's question, right? Which is, do you trust the evaluation? And just a caveat with these tools, they appear to be extremely confident and literal. And
Yes.
so, to your point, Gabriella, I don't trust anything, I guess, automated like that at face value. It really is about, it's very contextual, and it's all about the context of what you're trying to achieve here. And so in Jen's case, she's looking for maybe a way to humanize the feedback that she's providing, while also maybe just holding herself accountable to say, how is my grading? Was I too strict? Because I know one of the things that you'd shared to me when we were prepping for this is, you can just be in the weeds having to grade a ton of papers, and it can be exhausting and tiring. And so a tool like this can kind of help you hold you accountable to making sure that you're being equitable, and like
Right.
those first papers that you graded are also being equally graded as the last papers that you're grading, right?
Right. So Gabrielle was asking, how is this saving time? I wouldn't necessarily say that it's saving time in the idealized hopefulness of that magic button that Daniel referenced earlier. Like, yes, I would love to be able to do that in the same way that we can have multiple choice questions automatically graded with feedback given on each option that the student might pick. But for me, it's more of supplementing the work that I'm doing, helping to identify gaps in my work. And then kind of like whenever you're teaching students to use Grammarly or some other source, you hope that they might use it initially and they'll identify the problems or they'll identify gaps in their understanding of writing, but then that they're not going to rely on it as a crutch moving forward, that they're going to know when they're supposed to do these things. So for me, it's a matter of using the AI tool to identify where I might be missing some aspects of the paper,
Mm-hmm.
or giving me some language that I can use that would be more encouraging and identifying areas that the students can improve as well as where they're doing good. And so
Yeah.
it's not a replacement for me, it's helping me to do better and then to remember that moving forward. My feedback, I would have to say, is far more encouraging now that I've done this multiple times over, and to the point where I'm like, if they are not receiving this well, I need to go back to this and try a few more rounds because I really am aiming to ensure that they're getting the objective improvements, but as well as they know that I am truly their cheerleader and wanting them to achieve all that they possibly can and reach that potential.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, as the technology develops and as the higher ed develops, around AI, I think we'll see, more advancements in time saving opportunities. I know for me, there's huge time saving opportunities, but that's because I'm brand new to this, right? I've only taught four courses or so, which means I've only graded dozens of paper. And so I can get really stuck on providing feedback, and I can spend an embarrassing amount of time on one criteria on a rubric just because I'm stuck. And so for me, it has been a big time saver, a really big time saver, because rather than me, trying to summarize my thoughts, pass it over to my dean, get their opinion, have them send it back to me, I can get a little bit more confidence saying, I did articulate that well, or yeah, that did get the point across. And so I use it as a personal assistant to kind of bounce ideas off of and get general ideas. And something to note too that we're very careful about at LAPU is making sure that we're using these tools ethically. And so when we are typically using the Gemini is the product that we use, which is produced by Google, but ChatGPT has a version of this as well. We're using a version of Gemini that has an added layer of data protection. So that way the data that we're entering is not used in their model. It's never publicized, and it will not be used to continue to build their AI model. And so that's just kind of more of a caveat, something to know. But yeah.
Yeah, that gets it. I don't know if you spotted Olga's comment. She was actually asking about that.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
Right.
oh, good catch.
So I know, Daniel, you have a demonstration to walk us through.
Yeah, and we'll see how this goes, because what I'm do is I'm actually going to do this live in real time, but I want to give you context on what I'm doing and why am I doing this. Jen, can you see my screen with Gemini right now?
Yes,
Hopefully.
I can.
Okay, great. So again, we're using a version of Gemini right here. You can see it has an because we're in a higher ed space. So, but as Jen mentioned, I've already kind of done the grading process. But what I want to do at this point is double check myself, make sure that I don't have gaps in my understanding of the assignment or the rubric. And so I have prepared this. Let's see how well it goes, because sometimes doing this stuff live can be tricky. So the very first thing is what we'd say prompt building. This is the prompt. And anytime you hear about AI, they're all going to say, what's your prompt? The prompt is, what's the input? What are you giving it? What's that information that you're feeding into your literal confident assistant? And what are you hoping to expect? So in this case, I'm giving it context about who I am, what I represent, and what I'm trying to achieve, right? So I'm a professor at an online Christian university. I prioritize providing good feedback while also maintaining the values of our university. Keep in mind that I need to be able to justify any grade that I give. And then I ask, can it grade this paper? And so for me, what I would do is just copy and paste my rubric directly from the PDF that I receive it in. And the same
Daniel,
rubric.
can you increase the size of that so that others can read it a little bit easier?
Yes, absolutely. Is this a little bit better? Hopefully
that's a little better.
Okay, great. So here you can see I'm entering my prompt, and I've just given it just some basic stuff, but now I need to give it inputs. I'm going to give it two. I'm going to give it the rubric. So I said, here's the rubric, and then I'm pasting that in directly. Okay. And then let me grab the assignment here. And for the sake of this conversation, and just as a best practice, I actually always scrub any PII from what I'm entering in here, even though it says that it's protecting our students' data. We just want to take an extra step. So in this case, I'm going to copy and paste the assignment instruction. And let's just see what it gives us, right? So this is live. This is a little risky because we'll see sometimes, this is great. Sometimes it's not. PII is personal identifiable information. So this is typically information that is highly regulated in higher ed that we cannot give out publicly. You cannot release this information. It's part of the students' it's their protected right for us to keep that protected. So thinks of like social security numbers or what we would never give a student's name and address and stuff like that. So, all right. So as you can see, I mean, this is actually it was pretty quick. But again, this is all contextual, right? Who I am. I'm a new professor. I'm somebody who is engaging with this whole grading process, maybe for the first time in my life. And and I want to make sure I'm doing justice for the student. So what I'm looking for is a couple of things. Number one, I'm looking at, the actual points awarded in the comments, which in this case, if I remember with the student, I think I ended up giving them around a 240 points. And so this scored a little bit harsher than I did. But I find myself being a little bit more generous as I'm new to this. So, you're welcome, students. But what I loved about this is that you'll notice that there's a table in here that actually broke out this somehow. It made sense of this, right? Which was the copied version of the rubric, to actually put it into a table format and provide feedback. However, one of the things in our rubric around control of syntax, mechanics, and originality is APA formatting. Well, I just pasted it in here and it lost all of its formatting. So I'm not going to trust my confident literal assistant on the feedback that it's giving around this section. I'll probably lean more on my own feedback that I'd like to give there. And so, what I might do with something like this is be looking for gaps in the way that I'm grading a paper. Wow, okay, I was going to give them a 10. How did it come up with a 40? And I might even ask it, like, how did you come up with a 40? For this criteria. Fortunately, when I've been using these tools, it's actually been pretty eerily similar to my grades, which is encouraging, a little scary, but very encouraging that we have technology that can do this now. But one of the things I really loved about this is actually the strengths and areas for improvement. This is where I struggle as a new adjunct faculty member. Is I want to make sure that the feedback that I'm providing, that it's relevant to them, that it's actually helping them get from point A to point B, not to just critique, because I'm not too far removed from being a student. And I remember just getting the score, and that's one version of feedback, right? You get a score and it sends a message, but when you actually get personalized feedback on different components of a writing assignment, at least for me as a student, it's an opportunity to then take that and then add it to the next assignment. And so what I might do for something like this, maybe I actually want it to help me produce a better comments. And so maybe I ask it to, can you provide encouraging, specific feedback to the student on each criteria. I don't think I'm spelling that right, but that's okay. On how they could have, received a better grade in the future. And you can see my grammar's horrible, talking in different tenses. This is not ideal. Somehow, though, these large language models can put together and figure out exactly what it is that I'm trying to do, right? This is a very equitable tool. We have students, faculty members from all walks of life with varying levels of, skill with the English language. And you'll find that Gemini and ChatGPT and other large language models are very good at kind of reading between the lines. However, it is literal and confident, so you got to be careful. And so let's see here. In this case, it is saying that, and this is each of the criteria in our rubric. I should have clarified that. But on the lessons learned section, right? Your reflection is insightful. To strengthen your connection to Christian values, consider how the plan can be used to serve others and protect sensitive information that aligns with Christian perspectives, or explanation of issues. To provide a more comprehensive understanding, consider including a brief explanation of different types of cyber attacks and data breaches. And maybe they just talked about general components of those concepts in here. But this is one way that I use it in the classroom. And probably not even my most common application, but it's definitely a very valuable application as you are getting, maybe you've been out of the, you haven't been grading papers and you need to come back into it, and you just, you don't want to have to bug your coworker all the time. Like, hey, does this sound good? Is this getting my point across? Or maybe you have a student that like, they really are apprehensive to receive feedback. And so you can tell it that like, this specific student is very apprehensive to receive feedback. And here you go. This is why we are doing this live, but that's okay. Okay. Can you tailor the feedback for someone like this? And let's see what it gives. And what I'm trying to highlight is not that you should use this for students that are absolutely opposed to receiving feedback. I'm just trying to highlight that you can iterate, you can have it adjust and slightly modify until you get what you're trying to do. And to somebody's point earlier about asking, is this a time saver? Again, for a new professor, this is absolutely a time saver, because me doing this on my own is excruciatingly difficult and takes me a lot of time. So let me see
Did
real
you
quick. There was a
notice? I was going to ask you, I have two questions for you, Daniel. First, we have a couple comments in the chat about Gemini.
Yeah.
And so if you would be able to follow up on that about the private
Sure.
chats being shared.
Yeah, so I see Tay, I see your question. It's a very valuable question. And at least with Gemini and ChatGPT, those are built with a lot of privacy for the individual, similar to how you might use a Google Chrome browser, and you have your own history there on your Google Chrome browser that is kept for you and tied to that one account. And that's how Gemini is set up as well. So this is not one of those things that Jen cannot see what I put in my recents here. And other students could not see how I was using this necessarily. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. I believe it does. And did you say there was another question?
Right. Tammy also asked about where we can find the link to use the enterprise account.
Great. So if you are at a university, I would say please open a ticket with your IT department and ask them. They will walk you through. Every university has a different policy about AI usage, both on the staff side and the faculty. And so you'll want to work through your IT department to gain access to those systems. And hopefully you get a little bit of training or some videos on how to actually walk through that.
And then my other comment to you was, while you were looking at the comments, Gemini was giving you feedback and coaching you on how to give feedback to the students, which I find funny. It didn't actually do the work for you.
Yeah.
It was saying, here's how you can do this in the future.
It's such a good point, because Spark, the AI assistant that we provide to our students, it does exactly that, right? It's using the Socratic method to actually probe and get you to perform better without actually giving you the answer. It's kind of dangling the carrot there, for lack of better words. And so if you are at LAPU and you want access to this, you can just, I'll connect with you after the call, and you can connect with Wayne. I'll get your information. We'll make sure you get access to the tools. But something else I wanted to show you, which is probably the biggest area of time saving for a new faculty member like myself, is actually doing weekly announcements. You can imagine, I'd imagine even for elementary school teachers, going in and preparing the class for the first time and decorating it. You can't do that in a vacuum. You need help. You need to see what other people are doing. And so for us in this asynchronous online environment, it's not always possible for me to peer into how my peers are doing discussion posts. And although LAPU gives me a good framework on what I should cover, it's all the in-betweens, right? Like, what should I include? And so after you get to a comfortable place where you're really happy with, like, at least for me, I got happy with the structure of my discussion post. What I started using is Gemini to help me use that same kind of template to rebuild next week and the next week and the next week. So for me, that was a big time saver. And so now I've kind of got it down. So this is just one I've prepared to show you already, but I'll expand the text so you can see kind of how I address this. So, and again, you'll notice in all of my prompts, and this goes for personal use or professional use. You want to tell it who you are, give it some context about what you're trying to do, and the more you can do there, the more it'll help out. So I'm a professor at a Christian online university teaching information security course at a bachelor's level. Can you help me write my weekly announcement post? For context, here's last week's announcement. And you'll notice, again, there's typos. That's okay. Like it will adapt and overcome those, which is very helpful for me because I often type or talk too fast. So, and so what I did, I just posted it in, and then I said, and here are this week's assignments. And I just copied and pasted them from our learning management system. And what it came back with was this really excellent, in my opinion, weekly announcement, right? So it covers some information about grading. It talks about a Bible verse that, maybe an encouraging Bible verse for them. And then it gets into actually this week's assignments. What do we need to do? What's the focus for the week? So yeah, that's just another way for me to use time saving. And if I have time, I'd like to show kind of one more, maybe less common for others, but very common for me, which is texting or emailing students. And I saw earlier when we had opened this up to others to ask how they were using, what they think of when they think of feedback. It was, there were some general use cases as well. And that's kind of what this one falls into. So if you're like me and you don't have that many students, or you haven't had to do this as often, then just sending a text message, it feels permanent. It's like you can send it, but there's no way to get it back. And so I'm very cautious about what I send to students when I send it to them. And so you can see I have a prompt here. I have a student in my online class. They haven't submitted their recent assignment. I want to send them a basic text just to check in to see if they need any help. This may seem so obvious to somebody like Jen, who has thousands of graded papers and she's dealt with the easiest students and the most difficult students. But for new adjuncts, this is extremely valuable, right? It keeps me focused. It gets me out of my own head. And maybe I already had something like this prepared, but that's okay. But maybe it looked like an email. I just wanted it to shorten it. And so I can ask it and say, hey, that looks like an email. Can you adjust it to fit better into a text message format, right? And then you'll see it just shortened it. And, I rarely copy and paste this into another application. I think there was a question like, do you trust it enough to just use it? No, no, I don't. It's contextual, it's helpful, but it's not a replacement. But for me, it helps speed things up. So you can see with this student, and this is actually a real life scenario that I ran into 2 sessions ago. I had a student that went MIA, and they responded to me with some information, and I really wanted to be encouraging, and I wanted to put myself in their shoes and think, okay, what is going to help them actually stick and realize that they still got it? Because one of the questions, if you've been in this game long enough, is, hey, professor, I know I haven't been doing well. Is it too late to still pass the class? That's more or less the situation. Jen, I'm assuming that's not uncommon.
Not at all. I've gotten really
Okay.
good at doing those calculations.
So you can see that's more or less what I told it to do. I gave it, some context about what the student communicated to me. And then I gave it some context I went and checked, could they still pass the class? And with flying colors, it was yes. The answer was clearly yes. But I needed them to do 3 things. And I couldn't quite put those into, concise words. So what I love is it actually provided me with this right here. But what I'd like you to focus on is this, because this is actually the heart of my message that I ended up texting to the student. Maybe a couple of sentences of encouragement, and said, you can do this. These are the 3 things that you need to do. It's A, B, and C. It's like we're trying to, make it as simple as possible, so that way it doesn't feel overwhelming for the student. And so this is just another example of how you might use an AI tool to provide feedback to a student, just kind of continue to iterate, get them from point A to point B, from point A to point B, and using a tool like this to be able to communicate effectively, and in my case, do it more efficiently as well. So that's what I had prepared for this one. Jen, if you want to take the screen back.
Sure.
Great.
So you ended your demonstration talking about communication. which I think is great because when we first met, like we mentioned earlier on, my immediate response to what is feedback, it was very related to a specific assignment and giving a grade with a rubric perhaps. And then yours was much more related to the general communication that you would have with the students to make sure that they're staying engaged, encouraging them, kind of luring them back in, helping them to know that they can in fact succeed. Other types of communication might be just those difficult conversations where
Yeah.
maybe a student has demonstrated some level of academic dishonesty. Those conversations will make me physically ill to have
Yeah.
to contact a student and say there are strong signs that you have either, let's say, plagiarized, and now here's what the policy states, but I'm not content with just saying here's the I guess the consequence, but it's a how am I going to help them learn so that this doesn't happen in the future, and wanting to give them feedback, letting them know that like you are not black marked from this point forward. You have the ability to bounce back. This is just a blip. Like I want to be able to work through this with you.
Mm.
So I think those hard conversations is a great way to use these types of tools to make sure that it's getting after the encouragement while also addressing the issue that we have.
Yeah, I
Uh,
know when you and I were initially talking about AI feedback, it was very clear that we had two different things immediately in our mind. Yours was assignment specific, and mine was really about communication. It's like
right.
all the stuff that's happening outside of the assignments was just overwhelming for me. And fortunately, I haven't had the most difficult students. I've had I've had great students, but it's still, I try to use it just to enhance those touch points as frequently as I can.
Absolutely. Uh, I'm going to ask you, Daniel, do you know how Gemini would work with the different laws like related to FERPA or Title IX?
Sure.
Or
So, it's a fair question, and I don't claim to be the expert on this topic, but I will say I'm very cautious. And as for now, what we encourage people to do is please do not copy and paste exactly what Gemini says. Do not use it word for word. And cite your sources. When appropriate, cite your sources. If you use AI, I know I've used AI to help draft some communication internally for the IT department, and I will put that in there. Portion of this was communication was generated by AI. So I think there's still a lot that's happening in the legal aspect of higher ed around AI, and actually just in the global use of AI. There's still a lot to be done. But at LAPU, we believe in ethical use, which is transparent use, and not blatantly stealing somebody else's work, even if that's an AI, even if there's no proof of it. We would ask that if you work here, that you are responsible and equitable with the tool. So
Great. Well, when we first got started and we were talking about what we think of, and by we I mean we, Daniel and I, as well as all of those that are attending, what do we think of when we think of feedback? We mentioned what it looks like. So it is just that the comments that will help them to improve, feedback on specific assignments, the timeliness. And so what I have listed here are just some of those terms or phrases that would come to mind when a student describes what feedback is. And
mhm.
so they too would say it does need to be timely, which I think we've all can agree on because we've all been students. So we know that is truly important. The usefulness of the feedback. So just a score with a rubric does not help very much. We need to know what are we doing well, where can we improve, and then we want it to be well received. So Daniel, like when you were inputting some clarification in
Yeah,
the in Gemini and saying the student didn't necessarily respond very well the first time around, so you can make some adjustments to make it more personalized. And then, of course, for it to be motivating because you want it to kind of be a catalyst for change and make some improvements moving forward.
yeah.
I wanted to open it up again just one last time for everyone, if you have any questions that we can try to work through together as a group, and when I say that, I mean others in the chat can answer and share their experiences as well. If there's a question that you feel like you have handled in your own experience, because I know we've had quite a few pop in that are well versed in the use of AI.
Yeah, and this image here that you're seeing was generated by Adobe Firefly, which is an AI image generator. So just in the we want to be at LAPU, we really emphasize, the responsible use of AI. So we like that term, responsible AI. That's the way to go. And so just trying to be transparent with how we're using it here too.
Yep. We had a few others, and I think the watermark actually landed on the screen. This one I don't think made the cut, literally.
Yeah. Yeah. Any questions about, how to use this or why you might use it um, or anything like that? We're happy to answer.
But while you're adding any last minute questions that you have, I wanted to also highlight that we have another event coming up on October 16th, and that is going to be co-hosted by our very own George Hanshaw, and we'll have another speaker working with him, and he's added into the comments all the information that you need. So while today we were kind of talking through things and having a discussion with everyone and sharing some ideas, their workshop is going to be a true hands-on workshop where you get to walk away with your own personalized AI assistant, very similar to how we've created how the DLS team, our digital learning solutions team, has created Spark, the AI assistant that our students have access to. It would be along those same lines that you would be able to create and work through on Wednesday, October 16th. And so there's a link there that you can even register.
Mm-hmm. And I see one of the questions that came up, which was how close are we to a magic button? And I guess, the trick is how do you define a magical button? Because for me, not having to reach out to a dean to clarify, like, hey, is this text appropriate or not? It was a magic button. But on the grading side of things, we're doing, just since I've been testing this on the 4 sessions, the way that Gemini is making improvements in the back end, originally I couldn't get it to understand my rubric. And this is, months ago, not years ago, months ago. It just didn't put it in a table format. And then finally, when it could get the grades, I would ask it for feedback, and it would put some weird stuff in there, and so, but what you saw here today was a lot more polished. And so my guess is that we are very close to that. I think, within the next year or so, we'll start seeing products that will start advertising that they can do that. Although we will be, we'll always tread lightly as we're looking at these tools, because we're not looking to replace what we're doing as humans in connecting with others. We're looking to add to that, right? We want to add value as much as we can. So totally fair question. So, and another question is, does it have memory like eChat GPT 4.0? I'm not familiar with that specific model, eChat GPT 4.0, but Gemini's memory is very weak right now. And so what you'll see is, hopefully you noticed there when I was sharing my screen, that it has a history. So I keep that history because I'll often have to go back to it, and you can chat with it within that one prompt or within that one screen. But the memory is probably not as robust as more of a paid version that you might get through a dedicated ChatGPT model. Hopefully that answers your question. Yeah.
That's a great question, Shannon. No, if in light of transparency, no, I have not asked or shared that I use AI to enhance my feedback, because I kind of view it like the example that I gave earlier, where I'm not going to input the essay into one of these tools and just copy it word for word. I'm looking at it to get some ideas, kind of like what we would want our students to use a tool for. So get some ideas and then run with it on their own. And so it's helping me to give more encouraging feedback, more feedback that is specific and highlights really what they're doing well and then how they can improve. And then it's helping me to look for that on my own in future assignments. And so I'm not having to rely on it all the time.
That's great. Well, Jen, thank you so much for inviting me to have this conversation with you. I hope everybody that participated today, hopefully you got to see two sides of the spectrum, right? Somebody who's brand new to this and somebody who's extremely seasoned with the shared goal of trying to enhance our students and our students' lives. So yeah, thank you. And if you can, please join LAPU on October 16th. It'll be a very, very fun and engaging session. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.